I can have your attention for just a minute. He said, a good cook, she's magic. Not only is her food tasty, it makes me healthy at my age. She's magic. It looks terrific on the plate. She's an artist. He said, well, maybe she's not a good housekeeper. A good housekeeper, the house is immaculate. Never has my house been taken care of so well. My clothes are in the drawer. Never do I find a wrinkle. The house is terrific. Maybe you've got a sexual problem. Sexual problem, she does things to me I only read about in books. I get better feelings than I did at 82 than I did when I was 26. He says, well, my goodness, if all those things are so terrific, why are you so upset? He says, I forgot where I live. Well, we will all never forget Arthur. That's for sure. People like Arthur, they don't like Arthur, but everybody has listened to Arthur and everybody knows Arthur. In April of this year, I sent out a letter to a couple hundred people in the furniture industry. And I asked them to send back letters that told us what their attitude was about Arthur and what contributions they thought he made. I would like to share just a couple of these with you, if I may. The most significant one was one I received from a gentleman who started his letter off saying that he got a copy of a scientific journal recently, and the journal said the following. The U.S. Space Administration Division of Exploration of Extraterrestrial Bodies reports a breakthrough in their long-standing efforts to contact intelligent life forms in space. A planetary body was discovered, said to be populated with hominoid creatures of superior intelligence. Further study reveals, however, that NASA was not the first to establish contact with this distant civilization. According to early reports received from the newly discovered planetoid, there had also already been a visit by a small earthling, a certain Arthur Marburg, who toured the home furnishings manufacturing facilities and signed contracts for exclusive representation of all the companies for the total output on a galaxy-wide basis. Mr. Marburg was quoted as saying that the industry was light years ahead and the product was out of this world. Mr. Marburg was unable to grant an interview to this reporter as he was scheduled to depart on a trip to the galaxies to find new producers in order to round out his line. Fortunately, we were granted an interview with the Executive Secretary of the Space Home Furnishings Manufacturing Association, Mr. Way Out There, who was full of admiration for Mr. Marburg, the first earthling he ever met. Particularly, his boundless energy and drive so impressed the gentleman that they requested permission to clone Mr. Marburg in order to preserve his unique qualities forever. Sadly, however, the Interspace Commission regulating such matters had to rule against this request on the grounds that one Arthur Marburg per solar system was quite adequate, and that his energy radiation was in fact all the system could safely absorb at this time. Instead, after being nominated and unanimously approved, Mr. Marburg was inducted into the Interstellar Furniture Hall of Fame. I think that kind of sums up what Arthur's all about. There are a couple little letters in here from people like Mandy Steinfeld of Shelby Williams. So you have always said that anticipation is the key to success. You have been critical of our industry, and rightly so, that we did not anticipate, we did not do any modernization, we did not adopt changing technology. It has been our privilege to have had your advice and counsel for the past 30 years. We hope to have you around for another 2 decades. Mandy Steinfeld. Bob Spillman, Bassett Furniture Industries. When the overall history of our industry is written, one of the most mentioned people will have to be Arthur Marburg. With his endless energy and enthusiasm, it appears as if there are 10 of him. I'm sure we all feel that way. Another letter from Mr. Don Hunsiker of Ladd Industries. Roy Hill Furniture Industries. John D. Bassett III says, when I was at J.D. Bassett Manufacturing Company in the lobby and heard an animated conversation originating from the office of R.P. Scott, I expected to encounter a gentleman 6'5", weighing 250 pounds. Imagine my surprise when I found a little 5'5" hyperactive adult. That was in 1962. Today is 1987, and Arthur hasn't changed. Mr. Helmers. Arthur Marburg embodies the ideals and spirit of America. He is a man of vision whose ideas go beyond theory. And so on. A lot of letters. One thing I want to say is the measure of success is often measured in money or accomplishment or something. I think the measure of success is in fact the impact that you have on the industry in which you work. And certainly nobody can deny the fact that Arthur's had a significant impact. Thank you very much. Good evening.
Program, but before we get involved in that, I'd like to have a small, short business meeting. We had our board meeting this afternoon, and I'll just go over a couple of the things that we talked about. Our new directory will be sent to you in December. It's a new size. I think you'll like it. Most of our corporate people, I think all of our corporate people, have been notified by Carol Carmen. She is working on soliciting advertising for the directory. Carol, would you stand up, please, just so that those... For those corporate people that are still thinking about advertising in the directory, she's at this front table here if you care to speak with her. Our conference in February, on the 11th through the 14th, will be in Clearwater, Florida, and you'll be receiving information very shortly on that. Good, but it was just a response. As chairman of the nominating committee, at this particular time, I need to announce my committee 6 months ahead of the voting time. They are maxed out: Dick Chapin, John Angel, Mike Warren, Dan Rose, Bob Standard, and myself. I would like to thank first Joanne Cruz, who's in the back there, for organizing this dinner, picking out the menu and the table arrangements. I think she did a beautiful job. And of course, as always, Judith Reagan, our girl at headquarters, who does everything. We especially would like to thank our corporate sponsors, who are Aid Suppliers Mart, Arco Chemical Company, Appalachian Hardwood Manufacturers Incorporated, Julius Bloom Incorporated, Clark Veneers and Plywoods, DuPont, Fine Hardwood Veneer Association, Grant Hardware Company, Heckley America Company, Kent Design and Manufacturing Incorporated, Liberty Hardware Manufacturing Corporation, Nevermark Corporation, the October Company, Prime Computer Incorporated, Top Supply Incorporated, Wood Technology Incorporated. Thank you very much. We have one final thing. Bob Standard is head of our Design Protection Committee, and he has just a short report that he would like to give you.
It's frustrating to create designs, have them marketed, be successful, and then have them copied, knocked off, stolen. Not only frustrating, but it can be expensive and lose money For us, for our clients, for them it can mean loss of jobs, sometimes even loss of companies. The coalition of companies and organizations that's supporting the passage of laws to protect designs has invited, can use all this information, stories of loss of money, loss of jobs, to persuade members of Congress. This kind of thing, these losses are bread and butter issues. Congressmen understand that, and they're moved by it. Rita Castle, who heads this coalition, has invited the furniture industry, and especially, in our case, the American Society of Furniture Designers, to share our experiences with the rest of the coalition. So a letter will go out inviting you to send in the experiences you've had regarding theft of designs, loss of money, experiences that your clients may have had regarding loss of jobs and market share. Send them to the coalition. If you forward them to the ASFD office, we'll collate them and send them along to the coalition. The Industrial Design Society of America has promised to cooperate with us on this. With the help of all of us and the coalition, our voices can be heard in Washington. Thank you.
One last thing, if anyone here is interested in helping out in our next conference, we would really appreciate any help you can give us in programming or just doing some volunteer work. If you would like to do that, either contact OB Soley or myself. Okay. Thank you. That's the close of our meeting, and I think we'll begin our program now. OB?
The great designer convergence is about to begin. We have the realignment of all the design bodies in High Point tonight. I talked to Milo twice today, and he wishes to give you all his personal best regards and apologies for not being able to be here. Of course, you all know he had triple bypass surgery. I'd like to read you the title of a book that he included for me. It's called They Tore Out My Heart and Stomped That Sucker Flat. Inside were some very good advice from the doctor, which I'd like to repeat just a couple. When the doctor says you might feel a little pressure here, this is what it really means. The delivery truck in front of the hospital, all 10 tons of it, is going to roll over you. When the doctor says this might sting a little, what he really means is, have you ever been bitten by a large animal with very sharp teeth? And when he says this might pull a little, what it means is prepare your kidneys to be up to your throat. One of the things Milo told me that he's been doing in his off time now that he's recovering, incidentally, we're going to have a bypass recovery manual for Milo. And if you have any messages you'd like to include in it, please jot them down on a napkin or a little greeting, and we'll include those when we send it out to him. During the wee hours of the morning, his wife tells me he's starting to write a book called The Practice of Furniture Design in America Today. So I told Milo today that I'm going to rename some of the subtitles and the chapters. They're little chapter smirkers that I've retitled. The first one is From Hoffman to Baughman. The second chapter is The High-Lows of Milo. The third one is From Satsas to Salsa. The fourth chapter is The Layers of Thayer's Players. The fifth, The Two-Market Drill of the Coggin Noggin Knockers. And the last one, which I'm sure Thayer will agree with 100%, is that less costs more. We're honoring Milo tonight as the Distinguished Designer of the Year Award. And we have have the award, or the plaque that we're going to send to Milo mounted on the tripod over there. But to start off our evening, I'd like to introduce Milo's son Gary, who is president of Even Flow Furniture. So Gary, would you like to start our evening for us? Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Obie. It's really amazing what some people will go through to avoid giving a speech. I'd like to say that I'm honored to be here this evening to stand in for my father on this very important occasion. However, I really see this as one final attempt on Milo's part to punish me for not becoming a furniture designer. For Milo, being a designer is not a job, nor is it a career, but it's a high and holy calling bestowed only upon the very select. So you can imagine his frustration over the years as his many attempts to prepare his son to receive the mantle have met with failure. Poor Milo, I can still remember as I was growing up, he would often strike up conversations around the dinner table about Charles Eames or Mies van der Rohe, and I'd change the subject to Elvis Presley or Mickey Mantle. Or he would leave Interior Design Magazine and Home Furnishings Daily prominently displayed around the house, and then always find me reading Sports Illustrated or a cowboy novel. Or he would take me to New York hoping to show me the Museum of Modern Art or the Whitney, and instead I'd drag him to FOA Schwartz or to the top of the Empire State Building. Well, I think the years of frustration finally caught up with Milo, if you know what I mean. And when he found out that he would be receiving the Distinguished Designer of the Year award, and that he would be giving a speech, I think a light went on in his head. He picked up the phone, called the doctor, any doctor, explained that he felt kind of winded, and he'd like to have a bypass operation, a triple, a quadruple, anything. And he wanted it in September, knowing full well that he would not be here and that I would be stuck giving his speech. And in so doing, I would have to stand before you and realize what a great group of men and women I could have associated with if I had followed his advice and become a furniture designer. Well, that's okay. I'm actually very happy to be here this evening because it gives me an opportunity to give you a little bit of insight into the real Milo Baughman, which I will do with a brief story. As many of you know, Milo is a very religious man. And as I was growing up, he frequently took the opportunity to sit down and explain the difference between good and evil. I remember during one of those discussions over 30 years ago, Milo held up pictures of two chairs. He pointed to one and said, "Son, this chair represents evil. This chair was probably inspired by the devil himself. I don't like to use this word around you, but eventually you will hear it anyway, so it might as well come from me. Son, this chair is traditional." I don't want you to use that word around your mother or your sister. And I want you to know that if you ever buy a chair like this, you will probably end up being a very unhappy young man. And then I asked Dad what he meant, or what made the traditional chair so evil. And he said, "Look at the decoration. Look at the accoutrements and the embellishments. Obviously a cheap and disgusting attempt by a designer to sell the chair by appealing to our baser instincts, to the dark side of human nature. But now, son, let's look on the bright side. Look at this other chair. This chair is good. This is a contemporary chair." Isn't that a beautiful word, son? Contemporary. Kind of rolls off your tongue. Notice the light, almost delicate scale, the clean, crisp, simple lines. Notice how form follows function. And notice the total lack of any form of decoration, embellishments, or other cheap tricks to jazz up the chair. Son, if you buy a chair like this, it happens to be a Thayer Cocky, you will be happy and comfortable for a long time because it will never go out of style. Good design does not change, it is eternal. A lot of time has passed since that conversation over 30 years ago. But just a few months ago, I happened to overhear Milo in conversation with his 10-year-old grandson, Ryan. I just caught the end of the conversation, and I heard Ryan saying, "But Grandpa Milo, what makes the contemporary Thayer Cocken chair so good?" And Grandpa replied, "Notice the soft, round quality of the chair. Notice the warm, overstuffed feeling. And most of all, notice the charming embellishments the designer integrated into this chair. They are particularly important because they respond to a fundamental need we all have for color and decoration." Now you know why my son Ryan and I can't sit in the same room together. And why people often find me wandering aimlessly through furniture stores with a confused look on my face. So much for good design is eternal. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you realize that the picture I have painted of Milo Baughman this evening is almost entirely untrue, except for a few things. For Milo, being a designer is far more than a way to earn a living. It has indeed been a driving passion of his life. Also, my father is in fact a very religious man who enjoys preaching as much as he enjoys designing. And finally, he did make many vain attempts to refine my character, but he never pressured me to become a designer. In fact, the only career advice he has given me, over and over, is to choose a profession that I really love, that really turns me on, and then strive to be the very best at what I do. My father has set a great example for me in that regard. And on that note, I would like to read the speech that he has prepared for this occasion. The title of his speech is 40 Years Equals 80 Markets. Need I say more? I think one gets honored simply for longevity in this business. I suspect there's a trapdoor here somewhere. As soon as I've said my final word, it will be sprung, and I will be allowed to fall into total oblivion. Now, actually, after 40 years in this business, I shouldn't mind that, but some deep-seated perversion impels me to keep going, to keep designing. Oddly enough, I seem to be experiencing a revived creative urge in this post-middle-aged phase of my life. Post-middle-aged is a euphemism I felt obliged to invent when I turned 60. Without question, the drive to design and to see my babies born is stronger now than ever. There is a penalty to be paid, however, for this acceleration in creative output. Namely, your files fill up with terrific ideas that realistically, you know, may never see the light of day. I would not have the time or energy to keep an active client list sufficient to produce all of these ideas, even at a much younger age, let alone now. One can only pray that some junior college archivist will get permission from our heirs to look through these files of unused sketches and be duly impressed. Certainly someone should be. Thayer, I think you've seen through those files, haven't you?
I have.
I was asked to cover my professional experience rather thoroughly, but not go over 25 minutes. Now for me, this presented something of a dilemma. Some of you could do that easily, those who started designing furniture, say in 1985, for example. But in that I started in 1947, exactly 40 years ago, I obviously had a problem. My solution has been to write a fairly thorough summary to be stacked on the table over there, something we might call an appendage. This will be available later this evening to all who might be curious. I also wrote a shorter, not at all thorough paper to be read within the 25-minute time limit. That is, if my son Gary doesn't get too involved with too many wisecracks along the way. So here goes. Why do I have the feeling that those who receive this award should have either long ago retired or best of all be given the award posthumously? I am unwilling to go that far to accommodate you, so I'm going to do the next best thing. I'll accept the Distinguished Designer of the Year award in absentia. Since pre-publicity made it clear that I am the first still active designer to receive this honor, I'll quote Grant Tinker, as he was given special recognition at the recent Emmy Awards. Grant, who I suspect is about my age, said, "Although this may be the last chapter in my career, I intend to make it the longest and the most productive chapter of all. Men and women of ASFD, I have the same intention, or at least I have the same fervent hope, especially since I've discovered that special wheelchairs are now available which can be elevated to drawing board height at the touch of a button. My only worry is whether or not 20 years from now I'll have the strength to touch that button firmly enough." This event was billed as a roast. Next to being spoken about in gooey, maudlin-y, complimentary ways, I'm not fond of being insulted either. Thus, the anguish of my surgery and the complications that still keep me home are well worth it. If you can take me seriously for a moment, however, I am honored to receive the Distinguished Designer Award that the members of the American Society of Furniture Designers have voted to give me this evening. I am very honored, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart, which I think is still where it used to be, but I'm not sure. If I'm to give advice based on my 40 years of experience, it obviously can't be given in this 25-minute talk. I've indicated earlier that I've written a supplement or appendage to this address. At this juncture, I'll merely list and describe briefly the topics I have covered much more thoroughly in the appendage that will not be mentioned in these present comments. In the longer paper, I deal in some depth with how the buyouts and mergers might affect future designers. I also go into considerable detail as to how knockoffs or flagrantly derivative design, if allowed to go unchecked, can be self-destructive to the industry and seriously corrosive to the very foundation of our highly valued American Society of Furniture Designers. On a more personal level, I suggest in the appendage some home remedies for professional burnout, should it happen to you, as it did to me about 3 years ago. In this longer handout, I even throw in several pages of practical tips that I have personally found useful on how we can approach certain problems common to the design process. This might at least be of some help to designers who have only recently launched their careers. I comment at length in the longer paper about the ongoing invasion of name fashion designers into our territory, and what, if anything, we can do about it. I included a confession that my career as a designer has not always gone as smoothly as it might appear. Realities are more useful than myths in a 40-year backward glance. I give examples of some of the inevitable calamities we can all encounter along the way, facts of life for which all young designers should be prepared. And finally, I include in the appendage a tribute to the press for their interest and support in our work. The role as our champions is of inestimable value to us, and it should be more often recognized than it is. So for something of substance, I recommend that you pick up one of the appendages. There's only time for a few anecdotes in this short address. Let me start by telling you how to get your first big-time job. In my case, after making a pretty good name for myself in Los Angeles with very little money, the big time was, I hope, going to be Drexel. The formula is simple. If you live in California, you've got to be invited by Drexel's style coordinator to travel east. Mind you, this was happening in 1950. You put your renderings together in the line you want to sell, staying up 20 hours a day for 5 weeks. Then you go to May Company and buy on time a genuine camel hair coat. Your invitation is to the Chicago Winter Market. This costs $150 in 1950 money, but you've got to look prosperous. You take your previously owned Raymond Loewy design 1948 Studebaker Starlight coupe in for a $39.95 paint job. You figure it will make it at least to Chicago and maybe as far as Morganton, North Carolina, if all goes well. You and your still optimistic wife pack a large jar of peanut butter, several loaves of bread for lunches along the way. You borrow gas money from your mother-in-law and start off for Chicago. After a few hours of bewilderment, you find a cheap rooming house district in North Chicago, plunk down $10 for a week's rent in advance. You wash your Starlight coupe, shine the heck out of your shoes, choose your best tie, and with great ceremony you fold the tissue paper back on your camel hair top coat and put it on. Your still optimistic wife gasps at the splendiferous sight. So do you. Portfolio in hand, you are ready to keep your appointment. The formula is simple. Fake everything. I met with Drexel's style coordinator and his entourage over lunch in the pump room in the Ambassador East Hotel. While cleverly negotiating for an enormous advance of $500, I surreptitiously sneaked half of my crab sandwich into my pocket. It was the least I could do for my wife back in North Chicago, now somewhat less optimistic. Now that you've heard about my introduction to Drexel, my first big-time Eastern account, let me tell you about what was to be the next giant step, although I didn't realize it at that time. And that, of course, was the beginning of my 34-year-long association with Thayer Coggin. After a few years after my meeting with Drexel, I designed a line of case goods for the Winchendon Furniture Company in Massachusetts. Dave Murray, who was the Winchendon National Sales Manager, and I decided that the line needed a few upholstered pieces, perhaps 2 sofas and a chair. After looking for a frustrating few weeks in New England for an upholstery company who understood the light scale pieces that I wanted to do, he turned our attention south. We turned our attention south, in particular to High Point, and eventually to a company named James, owned and operated by Thayer and Clarence Coggin, who had specialized quite successfully in jackknife sofa beds. After an hour or so in Thayer's 7-foot by 7-foot office, Dave doing a lot of fast talking and me flashing my renderings, suddenly Thayer stood up. He sorted through the renderings, put the scoop chair on top, and then said, "I haven't understood a thing that you've been telling me. I've never seen furniture like this, but I like it. What's more, something tells me to go ahead." It took a moment for Dave and me to recover from the shock, but we did, found ourselves shaking hands all around. After this ceremony, as I recall, Thayer took us to a local barbecue for lunch. Times haven't changed there. I could go on forever telling you stories about the first years at Thayer Coggin, but time will not permit. I will tell you about 2 little incidents, however. In a way, they say it all regarding those first few years. A man named Otis emerged from the jackknife sofa upholsterers as our sample maker. He had what Thayer called a natural touch with the material. One day, having finished a sample, he stood back to look at it. Not realizing that I was standing nearby, he declared to Roy, a neighboring upholsterer, "I wouldn't have one of those skinny SOBs in my house for all the money in the world." You might like to know that we eventually converted Otis, just in time for the plump, down-to-the-floor new concept pieces that we introduced in 1965. The poor man went through 15 years of shaking his head in bewilderment. The second incident happened at our very first show in the Chicago Merchandise Mart. I had specified for one of our 3 sofas down-filled back and arm bolsters. Down was infinitely cheaper then. They looked and felt great. The only trouble was that none of us knew that you had to use special ticking around down. Every time a buyer would plop down into his sofa to try it out, clouds of little white feathers would erupt and float around the room for a considerable length of time. Our salesmen, always quick on their feet, would then pull a buyer as fast as possible over to the scoop chair. I believe that in a grade A fabric, the sofa retailed for $39.50. Can you believe it was a tremendous success? I might add, it saved our bacon at that first market. Through the years, Thayer continued to demonstrate the same intuitive marketing judgment that he revealed on that first visit with him. He's a solid businessman and appropriately cautious. But fortunately for me, his intuitive and risk-taking nature has often overruled his more conservative side. This has provided me with remarkable opportunities for me as a designer. But I am also glad that Thayer has a conservative side as well. Now, fair is fair. In these present remarks, I've kept OB's rule of the evening, keep everything light. This would have been my preference for this kind of occasion anyway. Whatever serious comment I've felt impelled to make, and there were a few, I've included in the appendage. But you're not going to get off quite that easy. As I draw this talk to a close, I want to quote from an address I made to the National Educational Convention in 1970 in Cleveland. I was in my second year as chairman of the Environmental Design Department at Brigham Young University. I included this quote now as my convictions held then that the visual and functional environment can influence human behavior and happiness, for good or for ill, have been profoundly confirmed in the 17 years since I gave this talk. You and I, of course, believe of the work we do, can have a direct shot at making the environment better. Whether we are modernists, traditionalists, or something in between, it doesn't really matter, as long as we're good at what we do. I simply want to remind us of the responsibility that we share as private individuals and professionals to do our best to make the environment better. In the 1970 talk, I gave 3 examples of how imperative the personal environment is. I will only quote one of them here. For 3 years, I was one of several volunteer assistants to a chaplain in a prison in Norfolk, Massachusetts. His name was Bob Dutton. In a relative sense, his program was successful. There were about 120 inmates involved out of a total community of 800. But in spite of his relative success, all of Chaplain Dutton's helpers suffered abject discouragement from time to time. As a parting gesture, before I had to leave my regular involvement at Norfolk Prison, I helped organize a money-raising program, work project, to improve the environment of the large room in which many of the rehabilitative activities occurred. It was an environment that can only be described as the most appallingly institutional atmosphere you can imagine. Gray concrete floors, concrete block walls, a very high ceiling, dilapidated furniture that had been picked up literally from the city dump. We collected enough money to buy carpets and new furniture with colorful and soft upholstery fabrics. We lowered the ceilings with a redwood lattice. The congregational church ladies made curtains. About a dozen of the inmates worked long hours after their regular assignments doing painting and carpentry. The time came for the ribbon-cutting ceremony, and the 100 or so men who had no part in remodeling and redecorating arrived full of curiosity. Here I should explain that during the evening and on Sundays, the inmates were permitted to wear, although they almost never did, a kind of dress uniform of black trousers, a white shirt, and a black sweater known as black and whites. These the inmates rejected, for to wear them was a sign of giving in to authority. They came now in their regular prison garb. Some of the men had spent 20 to 30 years in prison. When they saw what had been wrought in this previously unspeakable grim room, many stood and cried. There was no other place in the whole institution that offered them color, that provided a soft rug underfoot and comfortable seating. Without saying a word, these men turned around, walked back to their cells, and put on their black and whites. After shaving, they returned, in some cases, I believe, changed men. And now a word of thanks. In addition to OB, Judy, and others involved in organizing this event, I'd particularly like to thank Carl Levine, Thayer Coggin, Jerry Morgan, Arthur Marburg, and my son Gary for their willingness to add their remarks to these proceedings. It's probably just as well that I'm not present to hear them. As a closing comment, I would like to confess before you that I look upon myself as having been extraordinarily lucky in my career. Although for some years, at least in my private ponderings, I preferred to think of myself as blessed rather than merely lucky, the end result is the same. Incidentally, as far as I can tell from the vantage point of my 40 years in this business, you don't have to be deserving of such blessings, they just come anyway. Again, I thank all of you, ASFD members, representatives of the industry, and of the press, and once more apologize for not being here in person. Who knows, it may start a whole new trend. Thank you very much.
couple that dealt the most with Milo in his career, Thayer and Dot Cotton. They have a few comments they'd like to make. Thayer and Dot.
I didn't know I was going to be introduced. I wanted to ask you which one was a real fair Coggin. Gary, like father, like son, you're very articulate. Well, I'm Dot Coggin, officially Director of Public Relations for Thayer Coggin, sometimes known as Thayer's Girl Friday, sometimes known as Director of the Ironing Board, all those good things. But tonight, I'll play the part of a free glance report. Free, unpaid, of course. But you know that, don't you, Walter? But the offer of an interview with Thayer regarding his long-term association with Milo Baughman brought me here tonight. Now, Milo, you know, the minds of great men. I'm afraid our thoughts have really run along the same lines here, and we may be a little bit repetitious. Good evening, Mr. Coggins. It's nice to have you with us.
Nice to be with you.
Now, Mr. Coggin, I understand that you first met Milo Baughman in 1953 through a mutual friend. Milo mentioned that this friend, or Milo, was in New York and he met this friend and mentioned to the friend that he was interested in finding a manufacturer who did quality work that would make a line of modern furniture. Now, this friend knew that you had recently become very interested in contemporary and that you were presently making some light scale furniture, and he suggested that Milo contact you. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Milo did contact you with a phone call.
Yes.
Now, there have been a lot of rumors around. Is this a true story? Or was it really Robert Redford that introduced you to Milo Baughman?
Sure.
How I wish it was. But now, actually, Robert Redford came to High Point in 1978 to buy Milo designed furniture for his new home in Utah, right?
It's true.
So, actually, good looking as he is, and he is as good looking in person as he is on the screen, he has very good taste to select Milo Baughman designs for his own personal use. Now, when Milo came to High Point, along with Dave Murray, you got together, you looked at his portfolio of designs, and you liked what you saw, as Gary just described. Milo observed your operation and the quality that you built, and you liked what he saw. And y'all shook on a gentleman's agreement, then and there,
Right.
to start a new company. And you even named it that day, Thayer Coggin Incorporated, with Milo to design and you to manufacture. Now, with all of these designs, it must have been difficult to decide what designs you were going to present for your introduction in Chicago.
Well, in the sketches, it's with a design that I'd never seen before, what they call a skinny furniture. But I chose 3 items out of the sketches to present at the Chicago Market, which is the market about 2 months away. One of them was a scoop chair. One of them was a very light scale sofa. Then another one was a sleep sofa. I want to describe them to you. The scoop chair, I'm sure everybody's familiar with. I think we sold something like this with a half-moon base on the bottom. And I think we sold something like 300,000 of them. The second item was a small light scale sofa, tight seat, tight back, 7-inch legs on the bottom, 1 legs, with 3 small cushions in the back. Now, I believe the price of that was $54. The third item was a tuxedo sofa that Gary mentioned earlier. Had a 4-inch foam seat in it, could be used for a sleep sofa. It was about 84 inches long total, and it had a nice foam rubber seat and down cushions in the back. And this was something new for me, because I didn't know anything about down at that time. But at Chicago, I learned to hurry about it. every time a customer would come into the space and try themselves out, the fellows just float around. It got so bad that it was out to Carter. It's the best PR I ever seen in my life. That was the 3 P's that we started with.
Okay, you certainly seem to have made the right decision, because as you said, the scoop chair did sell several $100,000. In fact, that term, scoop chair, became synonymous with Milo Baughman and Thayer Cotton. And you told us about the flying start that Milo's career took off with Thayer Cotton at that first show. Okay, so the word flew around about this new line of designs, and as you said, the best PR you could have ever had. Possibly the best PR other than Prisma. Milo's Memphis or New Wave collection, which was extensively covered by the magazines and newspapers. Prisma was loved by connoisseurs of art, and some of these pieces today could be considered collector's items. It was exhibited at SECA in Winston-Salem and at the North Carolina Museum of Art in Raleigh. Milo's designs, of course, have been shown at the New York World's Fair. Remember that in 1964 in the model home. His designs have been shown in High Styles exhibit at the Whitney Museum. Now, from these 3 designs, debuting in 1953, to hundreds of designs filling 35 model rooms, each market at the TC showroom. Collections like New Concept, New Dimensions, Environment 70 and 80, Less is More 1 and 2, and Normandy Moderne. I remember when his sofa and chair from Normandy Moderne was on the Madonna show. His designs have virtually been shipped all over the world, Europe, the Far East, the Caribbean, and Canada. It has also been noted there that you and Milo work very closely together. Now, I have a question. How do you work closely with someone when you work at the factories in Hannibal, and he lives in New York, or California, or Maine, or Massachusetts, or Utah, to name a few? You must have made Ma Bell very happy.
Milo had a problem. He couldn't fly for a long time. He had a ear problem. So we had to work at distance quite a bit. Most of the time, Milo would, first of all, send me down sketches, regardless of whether he's in California or where he might be at that time. And then I would pick and choose the items that I liked and send them back to him. And in turn, he would send down detailed drawings. And most of the time, after I had made the prototypes, he would write on the scene and then make his correction, because I was very fussy about making sure the designs came out correctly.
Perfectionist. Right. Absolutely. Oh, those bring back some fond memories. I remember when Milo and his family came to High Point, they would stay for weeks or months at a time. Gary, who's accepting Milo's award tonight and made his speech, was a big brother to our 2 older children, Christopher and Royal. Royal even managed recently to have her first baby on Gary's birthday, August the 5th of this year. And Gary named his youngest son Christopher. So we have a lot of connections here. Carolyn and Milo's 2 younger children, Tracy and Mark, and our youngest, Clark, are contemporaries and were growing up friends. It would seem that you and Milo have had an ideal business-personal relationship. On the basis of designer-manufacturer as well as friends, in the short time that we have left, Mr. Coggin, how would you summarize this man Milo, who has been referred to as a merchandising wizard, a man of unerring skill, and a man of the times?
Well, Milo as a designer, my opinion of Milo, he was the best. He was a guy, I think, who really had run the design and receive a paycheck. And I said earlier, he was a perfectionist. I have done a lot of Milo's designs over the years, hundreds of them to be exact. But I always had to be very careful that I follow his instructions very carefully. Otherwise, he wouldn't be very happy about it. Milo is a person that, if you worked with him, he has to be like a member of the family. That was very important to him. So we were one-on-one at all times. As I said earlier, I worked with Milo for 43 years. I mean, 34 years, I'm sorry. And I can't ever recall of either one of us being mad at each other or having any bad words in the whole career. He was a perfectionist, but I tried to do what he liked me to do.
Well, you were a perfectionist too.
Maybe so. But it was a pleasure and a joy to work with him, man. And if I could rewind 34 years, I'd do it all over again.
If I might end with just a personal remark, Milo, in my book, you have always been the most distinguished designer. Congratulations on your honor tonight. Godspeed for full recovery. We love you.
The next step in the design process would be to introduce someone who had a lot to do with the selling of Milo's designs. At this time, I'd like to introduce a good friend of mine, Jerry Morgan, sales manager, Supreme for Ello Furniture Company.
Mr. Chairman and honored guests, Milo, I'm sorry you're not here tonight. As a salesman, I have very few words to say. As a matter of fact, everything I was going to say has been said, so I'll make it briefly. I had the good fortune over the years to work with a lot of wonderful people in this industry, and it's a part of my being here today. People starting way back with my mentor, Bud Mesberg, who started the directional program, and Paul McCobb, who was, in his day, one of the leading designers in the furniture field and set many wonderful trends. After that, as Gary had mentioned, the Winchendon Furniture Company, Dave Murray, and later on, for a period of over 13 years, there, Milo Baughman. Oh yes, I also had the good fortune of working with Arthur Marburg over the years. He gave me lessons in diction and elocution. What I'd like to say tonight, actually, is in the form of a thank you. Thank you, Milo, for all the help in shaping part of my career in this wonderful industry. My first recollections of Milo actually were with the Winchendon Furniture Company, which goes back over 30 years. And in those days, we were sort of competing for production. Milo's case goods that he had designed, which Gary had mentioned earlier, were being manufactured in the same factory that Paul McCobb designs were being manufactured. Wally remembers, I remember Wally from all those days. And it was interesting because business was very good at that time and we were all fighting for deliveries. Later on, I had the good fortune to join Milo at their Coggin. And I want to thank Milo for an education during those 13 years as a salesman. All of the sales reps that worked for Thayer in those days are indebted to you for not only your great saleable merchandise, but for the introduction of creative sales aids. In those days, we had sales slides presentations. We had the most wonderful displays in the Thayer Coggin factory. This was our fabric collection, which Milo took an extreme amount of care in selecting with Thayer to present a fabric program that went with his designs, which was unequaled for many, many years. He really was a pace setter, and for which we thank you. The great catalogs that Milo supervised, there wasn't a photograph that wasn't overseen and perfected by Milo as a designer, and for which, as a salesman, I thank you. The furniture industry is indebted to you for the creation of the gallery concept, which is so prevalent today in the industry. Milo was the first to create that concept in the Thayer Coggin showroom, which 20 years ago was the talk of the market, the meeting headquarters for the press corps, where there were settings and decorations and accessories that were unique and unequaled. Dealers used to come to see those settings always as a bellwether to see what was going to happen in the industry for next year and the years to come. The industry misses you, Milo. The team of Thayer and Milo were unique in many, as a manufacturer and a designer, the complete freedom that Thayer, as the manufacturer, allowed with unlimited imagination to you in those days. Lastly, thank you, Milo, from my children. Your great designs produced those bountiful, perfect paychecks that Thayer was talking about. It provided many pluses, such as good education and many other benefits. Milo, these days, the furniture industry sees you less, but misses you more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jerry. Now we're going to have a toast from our birthday boy, Mr. Arthur Marbury, who's going to present just a couple of thoughts on what the real Milo is like from the humanitarian side. Arthur?
Thank you, Obi. He gave me 2 minutes, and he added 15 seconds. I will take the 15 seconds to tell you what I am. The other day, little Johnny came back from school, and he told his parents that he got an education in AIDS. I'm AIDS. And I told him he should avoid intersections, and he should buy condominiums. So AIDS is not that bad. How can I describe Milo? I will do it in the following way. This year, in May, I passed out on my car. I went down a ditch. I woke up 2 days later in the recovery room on a Friday night, late, after 2 days. And sitting on my bedside was Milo. Can you imagine? Milo Baughman, that's how he wants to be called. Milo, busy Milo, creator Milo, has been spending his weekends at Baptist Hospital in Winston-Salem. Can we say about us? This man, Milo, I think Milo is a very happy man. He has achieved something we all want. He has achieved that great satisfaction of achievement. Thayer told me last Monday that he is a great perfectionist. And perfectionist means something we are greatly missing in our daily furniture life. Perfection means quality. And we need more Milos. Milo, You are recovering. I wish you the best. I wish you would not retire from the things you have done for us. Milo came from an area born out of Bauhaus. He was a contemporary with Paul McCartney. He was one of the great carrier of a tradition. Milo, I know you have been teaching in many, many colleges. Milo, you gotta come back. At least half your time. Milo, as you all know, had a triple bypass surgery. Today, that guarantees another 30, 40 years. There's nothing to be afraid of. Thank you, OB, for calling me here, and my best wishes to Milo. Thank you for letting me come here.
Senior Vice President of Bloomingdale's. When you say furniture, you say Mr. Levine. Carl, thank you very much.
Good evening. Thank you, Obi, Gary, Todd, Thayer, Jerry, and ladies and gentlemen. And Milo, I'm delighted to be here because we go back 35 years, as long as I've been with Bloomingdale's. I don't know if you remember this, Jerry, but when I was an assistant buyer to a great lady by the name of Lucy Toombs, I flew up to Winchendon with you and Bud Mesberg and Lucy. And who did I meet up there but a very urbane, witty, sophisticated man by the name of Milo Baughman. And even in those unformed and uninformed years, I knew that here was a special man, a special talent. And I didn't see Milo for about a year. And between the 12 months that transpired, I was promoted from assistant buyer to associate buyer at Bloomingdale's. And now I was responsible for upholstery. And with this promotion, I had to look more the Bloomingdale part. So I bought a very dark gray flannel suit and a dark blue cashmere coat. And I flew out to a winter market in Chicago. And I saw a very interesting showroom. There were several scoop chairs. There was one down sofa there. As soon as I walked into the showroom, I was asked to sit on the down sofa with my dark gray suit, my navy blue coat. And when I got up from that little experience, I looked like a shorn eagle. Nevertheless, Bloomingdale's helped buy a few of those many thousands of scoop chairs that were sold during the period. And then, of course, I enjoyed over the following 30 years a great relationship with Milo and Thayer. And I hope that it was reciprocal because we made things very difficult for Milo. There was one year that Milo designed a shelter sofa, which was a big hit in the early 70s, or even earlier than that, wasn't it? It was the 60s.
Yes.
And here was this man preaching not only to his family, but to his customers, less is more. And this was a pristine, simple sofa. And a very talented lady by the name of Barbara Darcy was doing 18th century Italy that year. And she asked Milo to put a brocade fabric on this simple sofa. But apparently Milo had great respect for her as she had for him, and we sold many of those sofas despite the fact that they disagreed on the fabric. 2 years later, I invited Thayer and Milo back to the office to talk about another promotion that Bloomingdale's was doing. And that year, Milo had introduced Less is More in pristine white and white upholstery to go with it. It was the early 70s, and it was the time for white. And we sat in the office and we asked Milo to do a black group for us out of the white group he had just designed. But being the gentleman and the wit and the understanding man, he made the whole group for us flip side in black, and that was an immediate success. And I think Thayer even added it to his line later. I remember the 60s and 70s when the whole boldness and tempo was captured by one showroom in High Point, and that was the Thayer Coggan's showroom. And whether we were looking at modern modular seating, or movable room dividers, or silkscreen formica, it all came from one man with the support of another. Milo with Thayer's support. In 1967, Milo introduced a communications workshop to help retailers develop a vocabulary to enhance and sell furniture more effectively. This was a startling concept in those days, making the designer responsible for communicating to the consumer through the retailer. All during the 60s and 70s, and even today, Bloomingdale's carries designs by Milo Baughman which have become classics on our floor. We in the home furnishings industry, Milo, owe much to the enduring creative spirit of you. It has continued to renew us and to challenge our imaginations. And it is very fitting that we in the industry tonight honor that spirit of achievement. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Levine. We certainly appreciate your fine comments. At this time, I'd like to present our plaque, which was designed by Alan Friedman and Ron Silentleiter, to Gary, since Milo will not be here, and we will in turn ship this to Milo as part of the evening's group. So I will now present the plaque, and then we're going to have the slideshow while we serve coffee, because we didn't get around to the coffee.
That's coffee. David Letterman.
The Society of American Furniture Designers would like to present this plaque representing the Distinguished Designer Award for 1987 to Milo Baughman.
You're here.
Receive this yourself, and it's a great honor for me to receive it for you, and I look forward to presenting to you in the near future.
My comments on the slides that I show will be cursory at best. Even I was surprised to discover, looking through my boxes of archive material, that the first ads and articles about my furniture appeared in the Los Angeles Times in 1947, exactly 40 years ago. On the left is an ad that was run by Bullocks, the group that I did for Pacific Iron. On the right, another chair for that group. And another wrought iron chair on the left, this time in white, was a little bearing, and everything was in black. And on the right, we have a desk that I did in the late 40s, which was selected for the Whitney Museum retrospective show a year ago. Shortly after doing my various lines in California, I don't have time to go over them here, I designed the line for Winchendon Furniture Company. And the ad on the left suggests that this is for young moderns. That was the label that was used then. Furniture had, I hoped, a kind of shaker-esque quality. And very shortly thereafter, I designed my first major line, that is for a major company anyhow, Drexel. And this is an an ad for you on the left, I think again in the Bullock's Los Angeles Times. Would the operator please move the left-hand slide forward? We've got a slight mistake here. And the two drawings illustrating the designs that I did for Drexel in their line perspective are supposed to be opposite each other. I think once we get those aligned, that the rest will go okay. I hope the audience will excuse this slight technical interruption here. These were very clean drawings done in one of the major Sheldon magazines on the Drexel line. Very clean for 1952. Now about this time, as much as I didn't welcome the being known as a Danish furniture designer, this is what people begin to call modernists. We were all Scandinavian or Danish. I suppose I was nevertheless influenced, and these early renderings of mine, I think roughly 1950, indicate some of that influence. And then when I finally started work for Theracoggan in 1953, there was no question that some of the Scandinavian influence, perhaps now we think of it mostly as a 50s look, was very prevalent. You'll see some more examples of those early 50s pieces. At the same time, I had a yearning to do something with more formality, and I had the chance when I worked for Arch Gordon, a very expensive showroom line in Chicago. So I could use solid teak and walnut in this subtly contrasting case. And in this pair of slides with all of the pieces on a stainless steel bench, it was solid walnut with black ebony inset pulls. And while I was doing the things that I did for Arch Gordon, I began to take more and more liberties with the purer look and became almost ornamental. At the same time, back at Theracoggan, I was developing a contract line, an office line. And this ad said that not everybody had to be a purist in order to like this kind of contemporary furniture, and to a degree we were going against the trend there. These are some more pieces from the Theracoggan line. More straight lines, less of the angular look that were characteristic of the earlier pieces in the 50s. I won't comment on every slide, we'll just move ahead. Now, the operator should be at a place where there's a page full of photographs. This is from House Beautiful magazine, I think. And it was showing two lines that I had designed for Johnson Furniture Company while I worked for, or designed for Directional. Directional was the parent company. This was walnut with black ebony or black dyed blocks for hinges and poles and so forth. And some more of that same furniture that I designed for Johnson and also Calvin Furniture Company, both of whom were doing contract work for Directional. And a major thing happened. We're going to skip ahead quite a ways now to 1965. This was the year that I designed a new concept for Theracoggan. Ther took quite a chance with allowing me to do that line. It was a great departure. Our furniture had some almost new wave elements. The basic upholstery furniture came all the way down to the floor, which was unheard of at that time, and had thicker cushions. And it really was very significant in our history of at Theracoggan. It was a giant step forward. These are more of the pieces you see in the House and Garden story on the left in an actual room, and on the right, I think that was House Beautiful, the story that they did on it in a older home in Wellesley, Massachusetts. These are very typical of some of the pieces that were part of that new concept collection. Now, these are shown merely to suggest that sometimes good ideas never go away. And I must admit that on the right, the giant tub chair, apparently was a pretty good idea. Incidentally, it was Thayer's idea. He said, why don't you make one big enough for two people? And we're still selling it in the line. And the all-upholstered legs that you see on the chairs on the left, this was an idea that was born or reborn in the new concept collection. Well, that led me into a really quite free approach to design. I did a line called Arrival for Lane. I have one photograph on the left and to show you, and then I did some outdoor furniture for Touchstone on the right, and in the next two slides you'll see that same kind of almost pre-mod or pre-new wave look. There were some conservative pieces also in this group. And that leads us to a short period which was roughly 67, I think, and it was referred to as mod. And I was shocked to discover one day that I was billed on a panel that I appeared on as the king of mod. That's when I decided to start going in the other direction. The furniture on the left is part of my new concept collection, and also on the right. And out of that, I'm sure most of you will remember in the roughly mid to later 60s, there was a great deal of emphasis on molded polyurethane, polystyrene furniture, and I did my share of some of that. Much to Thayer's regret, the molds were very expensive and the pain in the neck. And now somewhat in a more formal, a little more of a strange way, but still very colorful, were there was the influence of graphics and hard edge art. You see that in our showroom, and even in a sense in the kind of squareness of the furniture. But reacting to too much color, I began to show things that were somewhat more natural, although still mixed with some color. Began to use black lacquer. This dining room on the left and the seating series on the right might indicate that, as well as the next slides, which show that same emphasis on natural materials and subtler colors. In fact, that seems to be where we are now, but all of this was going on in 1969. Now, the circle sofa, which we had a great deal of success with, in fact still do, was born of my study as I was preparing to get back into academia. My studying people who were writing on the psychology of interiors, and so circle sofa is one of those things that came of that because it had to do with the social interaction that furniture groupings can promote. But probably the most significant piece that came out of my interest in the psychology of interiors was the shelter sofa. You see it on the left as a sectional group, but the idea was that you would sit in this and feel sheltered psychologically and physically. I also was very interested in the increasingly anonymous quality of our apartments and homes, and I began to try to work out architectural solutions to furniture, such as the platform group on the right. About that time, Thayer Coggin began to get really quite heavy into some woodworking. We weren't yet into tables or cases, And another chair that was semi-molded, on the right, the olive ash again. Now we get to 1970, or actually 1969, when we introduced Environment 70, which was a very pure group, probably in one sense the peak of our purism at the Chicago. These were smoked 3/4 thick plexiglass panels on the right with stainless steel rails and black leather straps, stainless steel base on the chair on the left so it had a springy quality to it. Some more chairs of the Environment 70 group. More black leather straps, and this time plexiglass, thick plexiglass used with plate glass and chrome on the table. About this time we got into case goods more seriously, and our first group was less is more. We offered only white lacquer at first. It was a modular system, as you can see, where you can stack it one high or two high. This was quite popular, and we did a less is more 2 version of it about 10 years later, as a matter of fact. We got into some higher end, more expensive cabinets as well, and with greater emphasis on interior fittings, as you can see in this double Mr. and Mrs. Armoire on the right. At the same time, we began to take our TCI, our Theracog institutional line more seriously, and put a lot more emphasis on that, separate sales force and so forth. The next few slides will be of the TCI line. Great deal of emphasis on using laminates. Thayer managed to acquire a patent so that we could miter the laminate, and it gave it a high gloss lacquer look rather than a laminate look. We use that extensively in institutional line as well as in our residential line. Then about this time, well, let's jump up now to the mid-70s. We're going to be jumping around a lot. I did a group that I personally like very much. It's one of my favorite groups. First of all, I had a chance to design special fabrics, as you see on the chairs on the left, and also some rugs for Bigelow, all of which was to be coordinated with the furniture. And then, bearing in mind that a lot of rooms were just absolutely void of architectural distinction, I wanted to include components that could be used architecturally. Obviously, this would work out better if we had a loft than the average suburban home. You'll see a couple of other rugs here that come from the Bigelow collection. I'll show you some more of that a little later. And a new adaptation of the shelter sofa idea, which works architecturally as just consequently of all of our innovative seating. Terrace seating that you see on the right, offered at different levels, was an earlier version of stadium seating, but it's sold to a broader audience. Then I think it's time to bring up the introduction of deco ideas. I became very intrigued with deco years ago. I never did think it was really bad, and so I was one of the first to suggest to Thayer that we consider some deco ideas. This goes back about 12 years when it was just barely an idea in terms of new trends. As you know, it has clung on and seems to get stronger all the time. Either real deco reproductions or interpretations such as you see here. Many of these items are still in our line. After deco, which is more geometric, more angular, I drifted slowly towards what I call the modern style, which is mostly character. Well, it's more often thought of in terms of those wonderful glamorous movies of the mid to late 30s. And I named this group Normandy Modern after the luxury liner Normandy. This is still very much part of our ongoing line. In some of the writing in the appendage, for example, that you might pick up tonight, I have a section about my feelings about how the furniture designer should become more involved with showroom design. And the next few slides are of some of the literally hundreds of showroom displays that have been developed in the Theracognition showroom over the past 20 years or so. I should probably say thousands of displays. But it'll give you an idea of how important perhaps furniture in the right setting is. I think this is something we all know by now, although there was a time when it was a hard idea to sell. These are all pretty much in the modern or deco style. And you will also read what I have to say about the importance of presentation in general, including graphics. This is just a few quick examples of some early graphics that we did at Theracognition. A wonderful art director named Rita Dramanis worked for me for about 12 years and took care of all of the graphic design. This was for Environment 70, a brochure about 12 pages, I think. This was for Palomino Pine, speaking of bombs, and also being a little early. This was pine, and it was, as you can see, very simple, very contemporary. But introduced about 10 years before there was very much interest in natural pine. So it was not a large success, to say the least. It was a nice brochure. Then later, typical of the brochures that we did for our case goods line and tables. This is for the Maple Grill collection. Typical of some early ads. These date back to about 1970, I believe, or 1969. And you'll also note in my appendage, if you care to read it, that I place a great deal of emphasis on cooperating with the press, who I think are very best champions. Just a couple of examples of a wonderful, intriguing bird's eye view of some furniture I did. This was one of several shots that appeared in House and Garden. And then Town and Country photograph. They are standing vertical and we too tired to stand on one of the shades. Speaking of other interesting mistakes, I'm only going to show you two of our high-tech group. I persuaded Thayer to try that about 6 years ago, and it was not. It was another one of those not very large successes, but it was interesting, and the press liked it, and much of it did end up in our institutional line. And since we're still talking about errors in judgment, and I take all the blame, I thought it was time that we did something that would reflect the postmodernism that was beginning to become so important 5 or 6 years ago. So the sofa on the left with a kind of inverted Lawson arm, a reference to our classical past, and the snowshoe back of the chair on the right were my gestures toward postmodernism. Somehow, furniture stores, even the best ones, don't really so far care much for postmodernism, so I gave it up. What we call the regular line, whatever our various emphases, we always try to have one at every market, we continue to fill in the regular kinder customers would call the Theracog or Milo Baughman Classics. So the next few slides will indicate what we mean by the regular line. And most of these pieces were or have been and still are staples in the line. And we reach a point where the Euro design becomes important. And here are two examples of my contribution. I must confess that I felt that the world didn't really need too much more Euro design, so I didn't do a great deal in that category. Soft modern, as it is often called, leads us to do rounder, plumper shapes. I did a lot of those, and here are a couple of examples. And some of these pieces, in fact most I guess, are still in the line after 5 years or so. Although, as many of you might recognize, these Prisma pieces that I did for Theracog are not brand new. In fact, they were done about 4 years ago. I want to end on this note because they are the most interesting pieces that I've had to deal with as a designer. I personally like them, own some of them, but in a way that's neither here nor there. It was a very challenging experience for me, and I appreciate the opportunity of having been able to do Prisma. Just show very few slides here. It got us a great deal of publicity, and so I guess it was worth it in that respect. There were exhibits, Prisma furniture, and a couple of places. And on the whole, it was, in spite of it not being a best-selling line, it was very satisfying. I think it led to some more inventive forms and silhouettes that I possibly would not have thought about if I hadn't have had this exercise in almost total freedom. And I end up with these two renderings of two Prisma pieces not made, and in fact I think that's appropriate to show an audience of designers renderings of furniture that